Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that, right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I want to start today's episode by telling you that I'm not a big fan of games that involve a lot of strategy. And, a game like Connect 4, you might be saying, well, that doesn't involve a lot of strategy. Yeah, it kind of does. Or Battleship or chess and like games like Risk, forget about it. And I'm not sure why. I think maybe because, in my job that there's so much of being strategic that, there's not a whole lot left over for those kinds of games. But when it comes to sports, it's a whole different story about strategy. I love strategy when it comes to sports. And in particular, I love watching sports, especially the NFL, and just watching how a quarterback can try to pick apart a defense. And, there's Peyton Manning and his brother Eli Manning. During the season, they do some Monday Night Football simulcasts where they break down all these plays, and I just find it fascinating, the strategy behind what's going on the field. And I coached basketball for 17 years, back in the early 90s through into the 2000s, and coached boys varsity, and then I coached 5th and 6th grade girls for a long time. And when it comes to strategy in basketball, just how to break a press or how to run an out-of-bounds play or how to run an offense against a 1-3-1 defense to get an open shot or how to come up with a defense that will stop the other team's best scorer, strategy all the live-long day when it comes to sports. But as private school leaders, we get so caught up in the day-to-day that sometimes we don't think about anything further than the end of our nose or the anything further than the parent that's sitting across from us at this meeting that we're having. And we all know that we need to get more strategic, that we need to be thinking about things that are more than a year down the road. But how do we even get there? And there's just this really interesting quote that John Maxwell talks about all the time, and it's by a guy named Leroy Eims, and he says, a leader is one who sees more than others see, who sees farther than others sees, and sees before others see. So a leader has to see it farther, see more, and see it sooner. And that's what being strategic is all about. That sounds like a lot of pressure. Well, on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, we are going to discuss the 3 keys to becoming a more strategic leader. But before we get into today's topic, I would love to say thank you for listening to the podcast by giving you a gift, and that is a free guide called 5 Strategies to Help You Work with Difficult Parents. And we know that working with parents is part of the job, and most of our parents are great, but some of them can be very demanding and emotional and difficult. And this guide will give you the tools you need to build better relationships and have better meetings with the difficult parents at your school. So go to theprivateschoolleader.com/parents to grab the guide, 5 Strategies to Help You Work with Difficult Parents. And that's at theprivateschoolleader.com/parents. And again, as always, thank you so much for listening each week. And I want to ask you another question. Do you want to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader? I start every episode saying that I believe that's possible. Well, I think we all want that, but that's probably not going to happen unless you get intentional about boundaries and about time management and your relationships and your physical health and your mental health and a lot of things that you do at work and at home. And that's why I created an online course called Thrive Academy. And Thrive Academy is an online course with 7 modules, 39 lessons, 9 hours of video content, an 86-page workbook with guided notes and reflection questions and calls to actions and habit tracking calendars and more. And we get into, your compelling why and aligning your practice with your core values and identity, And then we get into hijacking the tyranny of the urgent, realizing work-life blend with boundaries, vitalizing your relationships, effective leadership, lots of things there that will just help you go step by step by step, strategy by strategy, to go from where you are to where you want to be. And you can check out Thrive Academy over at theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive. And I believe strongly that it can be a real difference maker for you. So on today's episode, we're talking about getting strategic and being more strategic as a private school leader. And we're going to do that by discussing 4 things. And I told you that we're going to do the 3 keys to becoming a more strategic leader, but we're actually going to get to that last. And we've got 3 things we're going to talk about before that. So first of all, we're going to talk about the difference between an operational leader and a strategic leader. And then second, we're going to define a strategic leader. And then we're going to talk about what does a strategic leader look like, so some of the qualities of a strategic leader, and then we will get to the 3 keys to becoming a more strategic leader. And so again, we want to get out of that day-to-day playing whack-a-mole with our hair on fire, putting out fires all day long. And yeah, that's going to be part of our job, but our schools are not going to flourish if we only are spending our energy on getting through the day and we're not planning for the future. So let's start by talking about the differences between an operational leader and a strategic leader. So the operational leader is someone who is excellent at the day-to-day operations of the school, and they have mastered some functional areas. And so maybe it's like, you're good at facilities, and you're good at juggling multiple priorities, and you're good at problem solving and crisis management, and just, meeting short-term goals and creating stability for the school so that you can, meet some goals and focus on just the execution of the day, the school year, the calendar, just getting from point A to point B. And that's important. You have to be able to do that to run a school well, because if you're a strategic leader and only a strategic leader and you can't do any of the operational stuff, you're not going to be the total package, and you're not going to have a successful school. But conversely, what we don't want to do is be amazing operational leaders and not be strategic. And so a strategic leader, on the other hand, focuses on multiple facets of the business instead of just ensuring success in a single area. And that area of success might be just getting through the day, getting through the week, getting through the school year. And so you also have the big picture view of how everything works together, with enrollment and retention and the budget, and but also thinking down the road with things like accreditation and new programming and expansion, building projects, capital campaigns, things for the future to secure the future of the school. Strategic leaders make decisions that position the organization for the future while meeting current demands. I want to read that one again. Strategic leaders make decisions that position the school for the future while meeting current demands. And that's really hard to do, but it's really, really necessary. And strategic leaders are involved in creating significant organizational change. And let's face it, we don't like change. Our teachers don't like change. Our parents don't like change. But we're the agents of change in our school. And we have to be strategic about it and be really, really careful when it comes to change. And the difference means that the challenges faced by strategic leaders are going to be different than the challenges faced by operational leaders. And here's the tricky part. We need to be both. And isn't it true that we just wear so many hats, and you're like, well, I come to this podcast to get my weekly dose of encouragement and motivation, and now you're just telling me about something else that I need to do. Well, I'm going to help you figure out what it is, what it looks like, and then how we can improve in that area. Okay, so then let's talk about what is a strategic leader. Being a strategic leader means having the ability to make common sense out of a situation, no matter how complex and ambiguous the conditions. So let's talk about that for a second. Common sense and the complexities and ambiguities of our jobs and of our different things that come our way. And it could be about a loan or a mortgage, or, how much of this do we finance? How do we retain teachers who are leaving for higher salaries when we have this limited budget? How can we get more different revenue streams into the school, and just, thinking kind of like creatively, and just all of these intertwined things that all impact each other creatively, but also with a lot of common sense. And a strategic leader is really, really critical today because the world is getting more and more complex. We've been disrupted by a pandemic. There are more social justice, DEIB issues than ever before, as far as those things to wrestle with your school and make sure that everyone is feeling welcome and emotionally safe. We've got complex economic, we've got political instability or just polarization, at least as a minimum, going on. We've got global trade wars. We've got literal wars going on. There are just upheavals in different industries. We've got AI. There's all this stuff that's going on. And the only thing that's for sure is that there's going to be more change coming down the pike soon. And so all of this turbulence, let's just call it turbulence, it just creates pressure on your school as a whole and on you as the leader in particular, because you're the one that's responsible for guiding the way through all this change and all this innovation, and just to chart the course and navigate it. So part of that is just being that inspirational, informed, charismatic leader with common sense. And it's like, you just are listing all these things. And, when you hear a long list of things, then you think, well, I come up short in this area and come up short in that area. And it's like, I don't know, like, I'm just trying to figure it out. And we're all just trying to figure it out. And that's why you're here. That's why you're listening to this podcast, is so that we can, help each other, and I can help you and give you some things to think about, give you some resources, give you some encouragement, and just get you thinking about some things. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and be a strategic leader if you're not a strategic leader today. But the way that you can take steps towards becoming that is to, first of all, know what it looks like, have a desire to be more of that, and then to just take some tangible steps in that direction and give yourself some grace and give yourself some time. Okay? All right. So then a couple things about, let's see what a couple is. Literally, a couple is two. I've got two things here under what does strategic leadership look like? Okay. So actually, there's three things. So let me just hit them real quick, and then I'll take them one by one. Strategic leadership is broad in scope, it's future-focused, and it's change-oriented. Okay? Let me get you that one again. Strategic leadership is broad in scope, it's future-focused, and it's change-oriented. So what does it mean that strategic leadership is broad in scope? Okay. It impacts the decisions, the strategic decisions that you make are going to impact areas outside of your own functional area, or maybe even outside of the organization. And so whatever your area is where you feel like you're most comfortable and where you're really rocking it, maybe it's like the education side, and then you don't feel very strong with the finance or the facility side. Okay. So the big strategic decisions are going to impact all that stuff, everything. Okay. And an effective, remember, we're talking about broad in scope. An effective strategic leader is going to see the organization as interdependent and interconnected, so that the actions and decisions in one part are thought about and undertaken with the understanding of the impact on the other parts of the organization. So I want to just pause there for a minute. This whole broad in scope and being strategic and zooming out and having that big picture, the key is to see how your school, that every piece of it is interdependent and interconnected. So the decision that is made about whether or not you can meet the needs of that second grader, or they would be better served with the special needs support that they can get in the public school, we want to do right by that child, but that decision also impacts enrollment, which impacts the budget, which impacts programming, which impacts, the ability to pay the teachers and to pay the bills. All of it is interconnected. The website, how many things does that impact? A decision about curriculum, a policy decision, some things in the handbook. It's like, oh my goodness, I could just get, down this rabbit hole of how everything is. I'm not trying to get your head spinning. I'm just trying to get you to think about how all these things are connected, and one thing affects everything else. And if you think about it in that way, then you're going to be thinking like a strategic leader, because strategic leadership is broad in scope. Okay. All right. So then we're going to talk about how strategic leadership is future focused. And I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. Strategic work takes place over long periods of time. Like, you can have a kid push another kid at recess. You talk to the two kids, you email the parents, and that you put a bow on it, and the whole thing took, 45 minutes. Or if it's a plan for accreditation, deciding we're going to get accreditation from whom, what's the timeline, what's the expense attached to it, all of those things, then that takes place over a long period of time. And so a strategic leader has you in your role as a strategic leader have a different timetable than you in your role as an operational leader. And it's a far-reaching timetable where you're going to integrate your short-term results into a long-term focus. Okay? So far-reaching timetable where you're integrating short-term results in a long-term focus. And that sounds hard to do, and it is hard to do. But it, again, is just seeing how everything is related, and now we're attaching time to it. So the scope, and now the time, and then we're going to talk about change. So strategic leadership is change-oriented. The strategic leader side of you is usually the driver of change within the organization. It's like, well, we're going to add a grade a year, or we're going to add a high school, or we're going to add an early childhood program, or we're going to add a special, we're going to add a neurodiversity expert. We're going to hire 2 teachers who are going to provide support for our neurodiverse students. We're going to add these 3 sports. We are going to have a capital campaign. We're going to build a building. All of that is change. Well, someone has to drive that change. And there has to be a lot of thought that goes into whether or not that's even a good idea. And so, change is uncomfortable. And so then that change-oriented strategic leader is going to be the one that can cast a vision and clearly articulate it and inspire others, and then create a plan, and then operationalize the plan, and then keep everything on track, and then celebrate when the goal is accomplished. That's really, really hard, but I also would encourage you, when you think about how hard those things are, is to look back in your life at things that you did with a team or by yourself that were really, really difficult, but day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, you did the work that needed to be done, and you did it. So past successes can fuel your desire and build your confidence that you can be that change-oriented strategic leader in your school now. All right, and with all of that as an introduction, then we're going to get to the 3 keys to becoming a more strategic leader. And so what are they? All right, number 1, think strategically. Number 2, act strategically. And number 3, influence strategically. So I'll break each one of these down and then we'll discuss them for a couple minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. So the 3 keys to becoming a more strategic leader. Number 1 is to think strategically. So some of this is revisiting some of the things we've talked about already in this episode about complex relationships, and that you're, inviting internal and external experts to bring their wisdom. I think that strategic thinkers are open to all kinds of ideas from all kinds of people. And what I'm getting at is like, if you have a leadership team, even if it's small, when there is something that's really, really big, you want to invite some other voices to that table. Maybe it's the facilities director. Maybe it's the person who runs the kitchen. Maybe it's the athletic director. Maybe it's the admissions director. Maybe it's the maybe it's the social studies teacher. Maybe it's the school counselor. I'm not saying everyone for everything, but think a little bit outside the box as far as what would be some other voices that could bring their wisdom to the table that could then be carefully considered and tested and, thought about. And so then the other thing is that in these moments, I'll just speak for myself. Sometimes I want to kind of keep the decision making and the power close to the vest and consolidate power and have it be on me, because it's either going to succeed or it's going to fail. And then I'm going to take the blame and then I'll give the credit to everybody else. But that's a really bad thing. And I'll tell you that from experience, because even if it's successful, the result is usually burnout. And then usually when you get to that big goal, then you're just sort of like, is that all there is? I've mentioned it before on the podcast, but between 1999 and 2001, I got my master's degree in organizational leadership every Tuesday night from 6 to 10 p.m. for 2 years. We got initial accreditation for our school, and we did a capital campaign that raised close to $1 million for a building project and the staff endowment fund. And then we built in the summer of 2000 a new gymnasium with 4 classrooms. That was a 65,000 square foot building. And my daughters at the time were around ages, let's say 7, 5, and 3. And when that all got finished, fall of 2001, when all the boxes were checked on all those things that I just said, it was sort of like, okay, I was expecting to feel differently. But I think that part of the problem why I felt just burnt out and run down and not super celebratory was because I got a lot of help from a lot of people and to get all those things done. I'm not trying to imply that I did all those things all by myself other than the master's degree. But when you hold the power too closely and you don't invite other collaboration ideas at the table, then that's a lot on your shoulders. And even when you win, even when you succeed, there's a cost and there's a price to be paid. So just encourage you to broaden that circle a little bit and get more help, because the bigger the task, the heavier the lift, and you can't do it yourself and keep your school running in the right direction. Another couple of things here real quick under Think Strategically is about scenario planning. And this is big when it comes to strategic thinking. And that's just kind of, learning about future trends, imagining how they might influence your school to your advantage. But really what it comes down to with scenario planning is to think about different scenarios and then just talk it through and be like, okay, well, we would do this, or would we do this? And just kind of just talk through and plan and have some contingency plans. And what if this happens? I'll just give you a quick example. It's like my wife and I think I mentioned this on the podcast before. Back in the summer of 1992, we were looking at houses. We were in an apartment the first 3 years of our marriage, looking at apartments, getting out of the apartment, looking at houses. And my wife's dad was a builder, and so we actually decided to build our house. And so we broke ground in November of 92. But in October of 92 was Hurricane Andrew in Florida. And then a bunch of lumber from all over North America got sent to Florida, and lumber prices doubled. And did that have a big impact on us and the building of the house? You bet it did. And so it's just the idea, you can't predict everything, but the more people that you have, the more smart people that you have that are also willing to speak up, and you're creating a safe space for them to communicate, and there's no such thing as a bad idea, and you're not talking over people, and those are the kinds of things that will lead to, that's strategic thinking and collaborative thinking, and that is going to lead to better outcomes. Okay, so our 3 keys to becoming a more strategic leader: number 1, think strategically, and number 2 is to act strategically. And what that looks like is to take decisive action consistent with the strategic direction of your organization. And that's where your mission statement and your vision statement and your core values and your identity and the strengths of your school come into play, because as a strategic thinker, not only are you needing to make these decisions, but you're the one that's making sure that they're aligned with who you are as a school. And so, if really the vision and mission of your school is to, meet the needs of neurodiverse learners, and to help families who maybe don't have access to private school education, and you have a pretty big budget for financial aid, then is building a turf field and a new gymnasium aligned with your mission and vision? Maybe not. So another thing that is kind of under this umbrella of acting strategically is just, solving. I have a little quote here. It says, solving strategic leadership challenges means acting at the speed of change. And that kind of sends a chill down my spine, acting at the speed of change. But that's kind of what we have to do. And COVID taught us many things. And listen, if you were a teacher or a school leader during COVID, and we did that, and we figured out how to do school during a worldwide pandemic, we can figure this next thing out, okay? Leaders that are acting strategically are going to spend time solving challenges and developing strategies, with the idea that having a well thought out strategy is better than not having a strategy. And what I'm getting at there is like, okay, sometimes we get bogged down a little too much in the talking, the thinking, the planning, and the building of the strategy, instead of just executing and moving forward. And so sometimes that happens in the military. Vietnam was an example of that. Sometimes that happens in local and state and national government with the red tape and the bureaucracy. Sometimes, you're the agent of change, but you're also the one who has to kind of keep things moving forward and not fall into that trap of analysis paralysis by analysis. Okay. And then you're also, last thing on this is that acting strategically means you're going to focus on what didn't work as much as what did work. Navy SEALs, after every mission, they have an after action review, AAR, where rank goes out the window and where they can just talk openly about what worked, what didn't, and what do we need to do better the next time. All right. And then that brings us to number 3 on our list of the three keys to becoming a more strategic leader. And number 3 is to influence strategically. And I've mentioned John Maxwell many times on the podcast. His book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, I think is the best leadership book available. I can link it in the show notes. John Maxwell says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So it's your influence, not your position, not your coercion, not your, you have to do it because I said so, because I'm the boss. It's influence. And so how do you influence strategically? Well, you're going to build commitments and build those relationships inside and outside the organization, because let's face it, when it's a big thing, usually you need that outside support, whether it's financing from a bank, or whether it's big donors, or whether it's a local organization that wants to partner with you, or maybe it's that you've outgrown the church that you're renting and you need to get into a much bigger building. Whatever it is, there's inside and outside partners, and it's all about forging those relationships. So you're going to use your influence, and you're going to, that's what's going to move things forward. Okay. There's also clear evidence that the majority of change efforts fail. Now, I know that that's your word of encouragement for the day. The majority of change efforts fail. But while some change efforts are poorly conceived or badly timed, more of the change failures can be traced to a leader's inability to influence key stakeholders inside and outside the organization to see the change through to the end. And so that is not what's going to happen with you as a strategic leader. You are going to influence by building those relationships. I really believe that most private school leaders are high in emotional intelligence. You're going to lean into those relationships that are already built and build new relationships. And then you're going to use that resilience to see it through to the end. And also, when it comes to influencing strategically, you're going to have an adaptable organization that is characterized by people jumping in where they're needed without worrying who's getting the credit. And again, that just comes from high emotional intelligence, lots of encouragement, you not taking the credit, but you taking the blame and you distributing the credit to everybody else. And then another one of your roles is to try to clear obstacles out of the way. And then lastly, on influencing strategically, an organization needs a culture that supports collaborative problem solving and relies on high levels of commitment by people to do the right thing unselfishly. I'm going to read that to you one more time. An organization needs a culture that supports collaborative problem solving and relies on high levels of commitment by people to do the right thing unselfishly. And I think that sounds like most of your teams. That sounds like your people. That sounds like the people that you would bring to the table on this big project, on this strategic change that the school needs. And so you're going to support that collaborative problem solving. You're going to be open to the feedback and not hold the power too closely. And you're going to, that's going to cause high levels of commitment from your people. And then that high character, high integrity leadership that's going to model doing the right thing, and that selfless leadership that's going to model people serving in an unselfish way. All right. So what are the big takeaways from today's episode? Well, we talked about the differences between operational and strategic leaders, where operational is just the day-to-day, which is super important, but strategic is making decisions for the organization's best future while still meeting the demands of today. Very difficult to do. We talked about what is a strategic leader, and it's a person that can make sense of very complex situations with competing priorities and just guide with a steady hand through change. And then we talked about what does strategic leadership look like, and we said that it's three things. It's broad in scope, future-focused, and change-oriented. And then the three keys to becoming a more strategic leader is to think strategically, act strategically, and influence strategically. And so what's our call to action for today's episode? I'd like for you to schedule 15 minutes this week where you're just going to sit and just do some self-reflection, and you're going to answer this question: where do I need to be more strategic in my leadership? So your call to action is to take 15 minutes in the next week and then quietly think about and then answer this question: where do I need to be more strategic in my leadership? All right, let's wrap it up. I have another free gift for you just to say thanks for listening to the podcast. It's called The 6 Things That Every Private School Teacher Wants from Their Leader. This is a 6-page PDF that I think can be a game changer for you. And I guarantee you that if you do these 6 things, the teachers at your school will be happy to follow you. And you can get that free guide by going to theprivateschoolleader.com/guide. That's the 6 things that every private school teacher wants from their leader at theprivateschoolleader.com/guide. And then I just want to ask you again, do you ever feel tired and discouraged and overwhelmed and just feel like the pace of your job is not sustainable? And does the school tend to invade your weeknights and your weekends? And do you feel like work-life balance is just a myth? Well, if you answered yes to any of those questions, then I want you to check out Thrive Academy. And that's a new online course that I created just for you. And it can help you go from surviving to thriving. And I used to be where you are, and very, just if you're discouraged, if you're worn out, if you're, feeling overwhelmed, I used to be there, and I can teach you how to make it better because I'm thriving now. And I want to help you do the same. And so I really believe that Thrive Academy can change your life and change the way that you work. And you don't have to make all the same mistakes that I made. And so let me teach you how to go from surviving to thriving in Thrive Academy. And you can check that out at theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive, theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive. All right. If you're getting value from the podcast, shoot me an email and let me know what's a strategy that you're using, or maybe the biggest pain point you're experiencing right now, and that could be the topic of a future episode. And my email address is mark.o.minkus@gmail.com. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, never miss an episode. Grab the show notes for today's episode at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 73. And a new episode comes out every week. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and review the podcast so that the algorithm can push it out as suggested content to private school leaders all over the world. We're in 52 countries now, and we're helping people, encourage them, motivate them as they run their schools all over the world. I'm on Instagram at The Private School Leader or Twitter at The PS Leader. And if you got value from this episode, please just share the link with another leader in your life, another school leader in your life, and an aspiring leader at your school. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus, and I just want to say how much I appreciate you and all the amazing work that you're doing at your school. And thank you so much for taking some of your precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.